First lesson on a topic for GCSE, Ancient History, the foundation of Rome, from kingship to republic, 753 to 440 BC. That's the name of the topic. In this sort of introduction video, I know what we know and don't know. The origins of Rome are extremely murky. I understand why we don't know much. And then I can explain why we are learning essentially fiction in a history lesson. Keywords: origin, where something comes from, how it got started; myth, narrative, a story; Aeneas, it's the name of a hero from the Trojan War; and Romulus and Remus, the legendary founders of Rome, from this seeming stitcher here, babies and the she-wolf. So, when we study the origins of Rome, what do we know for absolute certain? We know for certain that we don't know how Rome was founded. We don't know when. No idea. No definites. The stories we do have are myths. They're legends. They're fiction. The Romulus and Remus thing, the Aeneas thing we're going to do in a few minutes, is definitely not true. And finally, the archaeology, which you might hope will tell us more, in fact doesn't tell us as much as we'd like. Yeah? We know for certain that it's a myth and we don't know very much. So, if we really don't know much, why are we studying this? Well, the Romans, this incredibly powerful empire, very arrogant, controlled most of the known world in ancient times. There's Rome, one city, and somehow they ended up running for hundreds of years this enormous empire throughout Europe, the Middle East, North Africa. So how this all got started is interesting to us. And because we don't know for certain, we have to study the information we do have, even though we know, yeah, it's not true, but it does, we think, it does tell us something about the Romans. It tells us the way they thought. If they made up these stories and believed them, what does that tell us about the Romans? So, let's crack on. The earliest stories about the origins of Rome are by this guy here, Aeneas. Aeneas was a member of in mythology, the royal family of the city of Troy. And there was the Trojan War when the Greeks invaded Troy. Achilles, Odysseus, Agamemnon, the Trojan horse, all that business. When Troy was finally destroyed, Aeneas and a small group of survivors wandered the Mediterranean for years looking for a new home, according to the myths. They travelled to North Africa, to the city of Carthage, where Aeneas fell in love with Queen Dido. But after a while he decided he had to move on for the sake of his people, and Dido was so upset by this she killed herself. And the Romans think this is what started the rivalry between what later became Rome and Carthage. Eventually Aeneas and his Trojans arrived in central Italy, and they had various wars and battles with the locals there. Eventually Aeneas and the Trojans won the respect of the locals, so much so that one of the local kings married off his daughter Lavinia to Aeneas and gave him some land to start a new city. And then Aeneas' son started another city called Alba Longa. At this point in time, according to the myths, Rome didn't exist, so Alba Longa got started, and Alba Longa was about 10 miles away from where Rome would eventually be. So the Romans claim that they are originally Trojans from this incredibly famous war, the Trojan War. And then you get onto the main myth that everyone's heard about, Romulus and Remus, the twins. And it goes like this. Alba Longa, hundreds of years later, and a descendant of Aeneas, was a man called Numitor. He was the king. He had a daughter, Rhea Silvia. Numitor was overthrown by his brother Amulius. Not killed, but locked up. To stop Numitor's daughter having any kids that might threaten him, he made her become a priestess called a Vestal Virgin. So I locked her up in a temple so she couldn't have sex. And then the god Mars came out of the fire. Sometimes it says just his penis in fire, and got her pregnant. When Amulius found out that she was pregnant and had these twin babies, Romulus and Remus, he thought, right, they've got to go. They're a threat to me. So he ordered his men to murder the twins. They couldn't quite bring themselves to murder the babies, so they left them on the riverbank to drown. But that didn't happen. That didn't happen. As this picture here shows, a she-wolf found the babies and gave them her milk. And then eventually a shepherd came across them, adopted them, and raised them as his own. When they became young men, the twins were great warriors, and they were sort of Robin Hood type figures, protecting the locals, fighting off bandits. Eventually, Remus was captured and taken to King Amulius, who sort of, not quite sure how, figured out this must be my grandson, look how great he is. Romulus gathered a little force of shepherds and the like who owed them favours, marched into Alba Longa, overthrew and killed Amulius, and put his grandfather Numitor back on the throne, in this picture here. A little while later, Numitor realises that these twins are special. They can't stay in Alba Longa. Their destiny is something else. So he gives them a bit of land, 7 hills. And the brothers set up a new city on the 7 hills. Not called anything at this point. The brothers argue about what it should be called, where one should live, various things. And Romulus starts building the city walls. His brother Remus says, those walls are rubbish, they don't keep anybody out. He jumps over. Romulus murders, in a rage, murders his brother Remus and becomes the sole king, and hence the city is called Rome after Romulus. Murdering your member of your family, your brother, is called fratricide. Fratricide. So the foundation story of ancient Rome involves brothers, one of them murdering another. After Romulus sets city up, he needs people. So he says, anybody who can make it to Rome and wants to be a Roman can be a Roman. So escaped slaves, criminals, refugees, anybody who can get there, once you're there, you're not a Greek who's escaped from somewhere, you're a Roman. And this is very different in ancient world. Normally, in ancient world, you have to be from somewhere to be of that place. The Romans didn't think that way. You could become a Roman. Right, now, stories. But what does the archaeology say? When we dig up around Rome, people find the remains about this time look something like this. Huts made of wood and thatch and mud. Not very impressive at all. So definitely not a big city around this time. But there are some clues. This is a stele, a Niger stele, found in Rome, dug up by archaeologists deep down. And it's very simple Latin carved on the side. No names, but the word rex is on this thing, and rex is the Roman word for king. So we think they did have kings. And there is this metal mirror. It hasn't got any words on it, but it looks like it's based on the story of Romulus and Remus, and this is very early as well. So not much to archaeology, but a little bit. And then in lessons, why might the Roman have chosen to believe these stories? We'll think about that more in lessons, but basically, everyone wants to know how they got started. Everyone wants to be special. So if you've got gods involved, if you've got ancient heroes involved, yeah, that's great. But also the Romans want to explain, well, how come we're always fighting each other in civil wars? Oh, I know. It's in our blood, Romulus and Remus fighting. It could be that sort of thing going on.